Hi guys, welcome to episode 4 of Forests and Freedom. We are here today with another guest, one I'm very excited about, and which is Jordan Ditloff. Before we hear too much from Jordan, I just wanted to let you know Thursday, the 22nd of April, we are going live with a very special guest, and that whole day is going to be, Tuesday. Yes, thank you, Carly. that whole day is going to be voter education. So you can take some of the stuff you learn here. If you find questions here, that might be a good opportunity to ask them in the live stream. And the very special guest is very knowledgeable on how to make your vote count, whether you choose a different party and you want to do it a little bit different to what Carly's put on the how to vote cards and all that, you can still be informed on how to do that right. Without much more to do, Jordan Ditloff. Who are you, mate? What are you doing?
So at the moment, I am the busiest unemployed person in Victoria. So I've been campaigning hard for 12 months, and the last sort of 2 or 3 months of those, I've actually given up my day job to be a full-time candidate. And basically, it's been a long campaign. I've been campaigning since mid-April last year, so this is entering the 13th month with 3 weeks to go. So by election day, it'll be almost 13 months of dedicated campaigning. So the
Wow.
reason that I've done that is because I think this election is so important, and the prospect of getting a Libertarian voice in the Senate in Victoria is absolutely worth all the effort and hard work, not only that I've put in, but also our fantastic lower house candidates and all the people in the party and our community behind the scenes. So you definitely don't have enough time for me to go through all the things I've done in the past. I'm one of those people that every time you talk to me, I say, oh yeah, I did this or I did that. And you think, God, how many more sort of random snippets of experience could you have? But I'm definitely a jack of all trades, but master of none. But I think that's actually a great way to be, because I think you learn so much from dabbling in and exploring lots of different things before obtaining mastery in them. And you learn there's a lot of synergies between different areas that you wouldn't expect. So I think it's much better to be a generalist. And I think we need a lot more people in politics with a lot more life experience. And my life experiences have been good and bad. I've learned probably more from my failures and mistakes, and I've had a few, than I have from my successes. And, the journey and the experiences I've had have shaped who I am today. So I've worked in the army, I've worked in retail sales, I've worked in hospitality management, I've struggled with drug and alcohol addiction, I've done time in prison, I've completed a business degree and a postgraduate law degree, and I've been accepted on the threshold of admission to legal practice. So if that's a bit of a whiplash statement, it should be, and I understand. But basically, I'm someone who has made mistakes in the past, and I have learned through hard experience the costs of kicking hard decisions down the road and of pretending that everything's fine and putting your head in the sand when everything is not fine, and delaying dealing with a problem is only going to make it worse. And that's the situation we find ourselves in with federal politics today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good.
100%.
So you've touched on a very colourful history.
Yeah, I think once upon a time, I would have been called like a colorful racing identity, phrase. It's just like it evokes this kind of, rich, larger than life character. But no, look, at the end of the day, I'm never going to have a midlife crisis, which is one benefit. But I also don't have a lot of regrets. I've made decisions that I wouldn't make again, and I've learned from past mistakes. But I know that all of those things have led me to who I am today and where I am today. When I was 27 in 2015, my life really unraveled pretty spectacularly on the public stage, and I found myself serving a 27-month term of imprisonment. But I used that rock bottom as a foundation to build a new life and to decide who I wanted to be in future and to turn my life around. And since that time, I've been 10 years now clean and sober. So I've not had a drink or a drug of any kind. In July, it'll be 10 years. And if I'm elected to the Senate, I'll be taking my seat in the Senate pretty much on the anniversary to the day of my 10-year recovery. I've repaid over $40,000 of money that's owed to people who were harmed by my past mistakes. And that's the beginning. I'm continuing to do that, and we'll be repaying that in full, whatever happens at the election. And I've been lucky enough to be in a position to use those experiences of addiction and recovery to be able to help other people in the same position. So I think that's what it's all about to me. And it's about making sure that I'm using the experiences I gained to help others.
Yeah. And I think if people want to know more about that, you've been very upfront and forward about those mistakes, which is commendable. And if people want to know, well, I think Discernible did a good podcast on that. So if you want to know more, if you really want to know the dirt on Jordan, look up Discernible, probably on X or YouTube, and hopefully you can
Yeah,
find that
and there's
podcast.
actually also so my personal website, which is jordanditloff.com, that's got a great sort of library of resources of articles, podcasts, and things that I've appeared in before becoming a candidate as well as
Yeah.
since. So you can really get a good idea if you've got the time and you want to sort of dive into the things that have shaped me and the experiences I've had. You can do that on that website.
Yeah, but I would say, from my personal point of view, if you don't feel like you got the time for that and you're concerned, I've been watching Jordan for a long time. I believe he's a very genuine guy, and that he has done what a lot of us have done in life and made mistakes and bettered themselves in different ways. So, yeah, congratulations on
Good on you.
on fixing up your life, mate. We all
Look, it's an ongoing journey, and at the end of the day, I've got to be vigilant as well. I can never be complacent, and those kind of tendencies and the addiction and sort of addictive personality, that will always be present, but it's all about channeling it into positive things. And I think if you look at the way I've campaigned the last 12 months, you probably see elements of that determination and focus and hard work. And it's just that my priorities have changed, and I'm sort of channeling those powers for good instead of evil.
very good.
It's funny, I can actually resonate a lot with your story, because I don't have the nicest background either. And I went through a lot of all that stuff too. And I think it really shows who a person is if they can pull themselves from rock bottom back up to being a contributing member of society. To be able to do that is a huge, big win. So yeah, congratulations and good on you.
Well, I think when you unpack the things that make someone an addict and give someone those challenges and struggles with substance use, I think often a common denominator is a really high degree of empathy and a really almost difficult to deal with sense of connectedness and awareness of the world. I think when you're very sensitive and very aware of other people, their feelings, their problems, sometimes that can be at the cost of yourself. And so I think that it's all about learning to channel that empathy and sensitivity and intuition and being able to accept life on life's terms. And it's
instead
not
of trying to numb it.
Correct. Yeah. Trying to numb it or trying to control your environment around you. And I think that I haven't met many people who have struggled with addiction or the kind of hardships that you're talking about who are silly or who aren't motivated and very capable people. And my friend Hannah, she's one of my oldest friends. She explained it like this. My first birthday after I got out of prison, there was a friend there who I'd met since getting out that didn't know me before. And they said, oh, geez, I just couldn't imagine Jordan ever making those decisions or being like that. And Hannah said, well, Jordan's the same as he always was. He's just got different priorities now. And I think that's a great way of putting it, I think that we're capable, everyone, if we're honest with ourselves, and we've seen this since 2020 through COVID, all people are capable of great good and great evil. And great evil doesn't necessarily mean you're intending to be bad or do evil, but you're nevertheless capable of it. So I think that it's about knowing yourself, and it's about channeling your natural instincts and strengths and weaknesses towards a positive end.
Very good. Now, the 30 by 30 agenda, you signed a petition against that, so we know where you stand.
Yes.
But I wanted to bring that up because that's something obviously we're talking about a lot in our group when it comes to the forests and things.
Yeah, that's right. And the Libertarian Party, as part of our election policy platform, and it's been long-standing Libertarian policy already, is that we oppose multilateral treaties that actually limit the sovereignty of the Australian government and the Australian Parliament, as elected by and representative of its people, to constrain what we as a sovereign nation and as taxpayers and citizens can actually direct our politicians to do. And as a law graduate, I know that the external affairs power under the Constitution has been abused and manipulated by successive federal governments, supported by the High Court, to give the federal parliament the power to make laws and to act in areas that was never intended by our founding fathers when our country was first born in 1901, they foresaw a much more limited role for the federal government, and that the federal government would be held in balance and kept in check by the Senate, being the state's house, which is the House of Parliament I'm running for. And unfortunately, a combination of the High Court really consistently giving the federal government more power in the way they've interpreted the Constitution, and the really negative influence of the party system and the voting discipline of the party system has kind of corrupted a lot of the checks and balances that should have been in place to prevent overreaches like this. But we think that both on principle, the federal government shouldn't be entering into these treaties. And we also believe that even where these treaties exist and other obligations exist, we don't think that public land, national parks should be locked away from Victorians and Australians. We think that the best people to care for and be custodians for our natural wilderness areas are the people who use them every day, the people who understand them. You know, during the winter, the only way many of these trails and paths and national parks are kept clear and free of hazards is by hunters, is by, you know, hikers, people who use the area and the land. You know, Parks Victoria would have no idea, you know, how to or what would be going wrong during that time because they're not there. So I think that, yeah, we need to give people a little bit more credit and have a bit more faith in the vested interest that people who enjoy using these areas have, and the knowledge and kind of love they have for these areas.
Yeah, very good. Now, because we're Australian, this is a question that does need to be explained here. And I know it's a very broad question, so take what time you need. What is a libertarian? And I've heard you do an example of this using the Lord of the Rings, and I think that one's very good. So, but what's a libertarian? What are we about?
Yeah, look, and if anyone's watching this and they haven't really met me or come across me or been paying attention to my campaign, I have, as much as with my past, I've been open and honest about it. I've also been open and honest about the fact that I'm a massive nerd. And if I'm elected, I make no apologies for the fact that there will be many, many Star Wars references and Lord of the Rings references. It's not lost on me that the election is being called for May the 3rd, and the subsequent day, the Sunday after the election day, will be May the 4th, which is, of course, International Star Wars Day. So there'll be many jokes, many memes. And when it comes to the Lord of the Rings analogy, the way I explain libertarianism is like this. You know, the Liberal Party are like Gondor and the Men of the West and, you know, Boromir. They want to take the ring, and the ring being the power of government, and they want to use it for what they think are good purposes. They want to use it to defeat the forces of socialism and darkness. And they think that they can take this power that government gives them and set things right and use it to do good, you know. But the actual power of government and the temptation to use that power corruptly and to coerce and harm others and have unintended consequences is so strong that it doesn't matter how good your intentions are or how noble your intentions are. And so, you know, if the Labor Party is the forces of darkness and Sauron, and the Liberal Party is the well-meaning but ultimately misguided forces of the West, the Libertarians are the hobbits trying to take the ring to Mount Doom and throw it into the fire. We want to get in charge and leave you the hell alone. And we want to basically not pull the levers of government differently to have a different outcome, but we want to smash the levers so there's less areas that the government can actually do harm in your life.
Very good.
I like these.
And so,
yes, if I am elected, there will absolutely be, like, particularly if there's it looks unlikely at this point, but if Peter Dutton were to be elected with a small majority in the Parliament, I was to be a senator, there would be gifs of, you know, me as Elrond going like, throw it into the fire, and, you know, Peter Dutton going like, no. That will absolutely happen. 100% campaign core promise.
Well, somebody needs to start making some good ones, because the Labor Party's ones are just crap.
Both of them, man. Some of the AI nightmare fuel stuff we're seeing coming out of both major party campaigns, and I won't share this until after the election, but I have a source who's provided me with some things that hit the cutting room floor that didn't actually get aired from the Liberal Party campaign, and it is bad. Like, it could have been even worse. Like, AI nightmares. You know, they had this AI petrol excise ad where it was like an alien filling up a jet pilot plane or something. It's like, jet planes don't even run on petrol it's just bizarre. Like, the whole thing is, and as much as we can laugh, and it's so stupid, it's funny. At the same time, we've got a literal, legitimate cost of living crisis where people are choosing between buying groceries and putting petrol in their car. And both major parties are showing that they don't understand those struggles and they're treating it like a joke. So on one level, it's funny and embarrassing. on another level, it's actually very offensive and very frustrating that the major parties are so out of touch that they don't understand what real cost of living looks like. And if you look at the Libertarian example, not only do we actually understand, but we've shown we understand by doing things like the petrol excise activation that we did before Christmas on the 18th of December. We had an hour at a petrol station in Cranbourne West where for that hour, we gave voters in Cranbourne a vision of what a more libertarian world would look like. And we paid for the full fuel excise for that hour, not 25 cents off, not half the fuel excise for 12 months, permanent fuel excise abolition. And petrol was 99 cents a dollar at this petrol station for an hour. And we had cars lining up around the corner for 15 minutes before that. And we had people coming who had told us that they had actually held off filling up their car because they couldn't afford to do that. So when they saw what we were doing, and they had like jerry cans and stuff, it was really sad. Like the first people to come in were people who really were struggling. And Cranbourne West is an area of Victoria that, you know, is really struggling. It's second and third world conditions in some parts of Victoria at the moment. And we've got a Labor government and a Liberal government who look at the real struggles and the real problems that Australians are facing and instead decide that they want to give $1.1 billion to the Ukraine for a foreign conflict. It's obscene. That's the only word I can use to describe it. And it's hard not to be angry and to be frustrated, but we have to stay positive and we have to really explain to people that there is an alternative, because you're not going to hear the major parties arguing about that because they agree.
It's pathetic. It makes me so mad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I use the word obscene, and that sounds like a really harsh, extreme word, but I can't think of any better word to describe it. It's actually sickening, and it's actually, like
disgusting.
You said, it's offensive. Yeah, you know, if you saw someone drowning and you couldn't swim, you wouldn't jump in and go to save them. And you know, if you're yourself in trouble, and we are in trouble, we've got people who are really genuinely struggling in this country. The idea that we should be having these vanity projects and ego boosting things where we're paying for Papua New Guinea's football team and all this sort of rubbish. Like, it's just, you know, yeah, I just think it's so wrong, and I can't see any justification for it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, the same thing, you would have similar policy when it comes to foreign intervention in wars and things like that. And yeah, you know, if it's why are we sending our troops or sending our money to wars that really don't affect us?
Yeah, I mean, look, libertarians don't trust our government to spend our money in our backyard where we can see what they're doing with it, right? And they routinely show that they can't be trusted to do that.
Yeah.
Like time and again, whether it's the NBN or Snowy Hydro 2.0 or whatever, you know, desalination plant in Wonbaggi, like there are just a list as long as my arm of things the government has completely ballsed up in our own backyard while we're watching them. Why would we believe that our taxpayers' money given to a foreign government overseas, where we can't see what they're doing with it, would be spent any better? Like, I just can't understand why, when it comes to foreign policy, many Australians are prepared to think that our government has this sort of wisdom and foresight and intelligence to do these things, when they've shown that they're basically, you know, the intelligence level of like a dumb, blind, mute toddler. Like, they just shouldn't be trusted with the resources we trust them with. Sorry, I know that was a bit of a colourful metaphor, but I
like it.
That's good. So you did your I suppose, you know, political stunt on the fuel, and the Libertarians in New South Wales did one with beer, I believe. Is that?
Yeah, so they did a alcohol excise variant of the fuel activation we did, and I thought it was really funny. I actually haven't yet watched the episode Topher Field did with Craig to find out what the police were sniffing around trying to work out, but it was probably some Karen complaining that, you know,
I started watching it, and
they can't do that. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. Yeah, so I you know, it's like the you know, just continue the Star Wars thing. It's like, you know, like, oh, they can't do that. Shoot them or something. You know, like, it's like, I just can't understand why it would be any of their business. But the fact that there was like, get rid of the woke agenda, cut the woke agenda on the palette. My only thing I was going to say as sort of a quip was like, oh, maybe they're seeing if it's hate speech. I don't know. Or but yeah, like at the end of the day, I think that we're just so overtaxed. Everything from tobacco to alcohol to petrol, the government is claiming to give with one hand, like they're saying, okay, here, have these stage 3 tax cuts. And then in the other, they're increasing excise across the board on all of those things I was talking about, which are things that ordinary, normal working people want to buy, not people that are sitting in their ivory towers in the CBD, working from home, the laptop class in air conditioning. They're not driving. They're not, doing things that the common people do. But also, we've got inflation pushing ordinary, everyday, hardworking Australians into higher tax brackets. And within 18 months, the income tax relief that was given through the stage 3 tax cuts is consumed by bracket creep, which is the impact of inflation on tax. So literally, you've bought 18 months of time, and it's all this big song and dance and saying, "Oh, how much we've given you," but then with the other hand, they're taking it out of your pocket. So it really is time in this country for meaningful tax reform, for focusing on productivity. All of these words that you will not have heard since the last term of the Howard government. It's a joint project now. Both Labor and Liberal are committed to this tax and spend. And we've seen just in the last couple of days over the weekend, Peter Dutton saying he's going to just give you $1,200 for cost of living relief. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. I was working at Officeworks in 2009 when Kevin Rudd gave his, global financial crisis cash injection, and everyone just got given $1,500. And guess what? Suddenly, the cheapest laptop cost $1,500, and everyone came into Officeworks and they gave over their government check, and they got this laptop that was not worth $1,500, but now was because the government money was sluicing through the economy. And we're all still paying for that overreaction to the GFC, and then the same overreaction to COVID. All the government knows how to respond to a crisis is to pass more laws, more regulations, and more spending. And all three of those things have massive downstream consequences, not just for us, but for our kids and their grandkids.
And the thing I wish that people would actually recognize is when they're saying, we're going to give you, or we're going to, incentivize whatever. That's taxpayers' money. That's our money that they're using as election promises.
Absolutely.
Like, they take from your back pocket and put it in your front pocket. And it just doesn't make sense.
It's like a magician. It's like an illusionist. It's like an illusionist cup game where you watch with the kids and they sort of show you from the camera angle what they're doing, and they'll sort of take the pen and then they'll pass it to the other parent, and then the kid gets it in the left hand and says, "Oh my God, that's magic!" It's really it's true sleight of hand and trickery.
Grown-ass adults are falling for that.
Of course, but it's partly because people want to believe that they can get something for nothing, and that's magical thinking. It's the sort of thinking that we have when we're children, that that you can have things without sacrifice or without a price. I've been calling it through the course of my campaign magic pudding economics, and I don't know if you remember the book The Magic Pudding, the children's book, where there's this character. He's a pudding, and basically it can be whatever flavor you like, and he just regenerates when you eat. So you just eat the pudding and the pudding comes back, and it can be whatever flavor pudding you like. And so it's an oldie but a goodie. Probably aging myself there at 38, but it's the idea that you can have something without a trade-off or without a sacrifice, and it's just not the way the world works. And I think that deep down, most Australians subconsciously understand that something has to give, that the rubber band can only stretch so far before it snaps, and the longer we stretch it, and the longer we push that reckoning away, the more severe it will be. And that's what I meant when I said earlier that I understand the cost of kicking things down the road. Like, when I went to prison, I had 3 months of unopened mail. You know what I mean? Because I was in this magical thinking headspace where I thought, like, if I didn't open the mail, it wasn't real. All the problems the business was having, all the problems I was going through, that I could somehow just pretend it wasn't happening, and that it would get better magically on its own. And of course it didn't. And of course it became worse because it wasn't attended to. And that's the level of thinking and leadership, or lack of leadership, we've got in this country at the moment. Our current crop of leaders, be it Albanese, Bowen, Dutton, whatever, they maybe have another 5-6 years in politics before they ride off into the sunset and get their lobbyist-funded job working for one of the big four banks or mining companies, or any number of the other grifts that they'll go on to do. And they are just not thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions. They don't care because they don't have any reason to care. So that's the reason I'm running at 38 at a time when I want to be starting a family, when I want to be hopefully buying a home, starting a law career that I had to fight tooth and nail to get. The reason I'm running now is because I don't think we have 10 years.
No, we don't. And also I'll highlight the Greens, the Greens way of fixing our economy is, tax the rich.
Yeah, well, it's the politics of envy.
It doesn't work. It's just like it is so stupid that I can't even believe that people fall for this crap. Like you've got 45 billionaires in Australia. What happens when you start taxing all of them? Where are they going to go? Like you start throwing 90% tax rates on our billionaires, then you still like you make what 40 billion.
Well, here's the thing, right, Carly, is if we had
What's our
our
whole
way, yeah,
what's our
like if
whole
well, what's the
world
incentive?
debt
Why would you
debt?
ever, yeah, exactly. Why would you ever try to excel or achieve or conserve anything? And you know, if our policy was implemented on income tax, we would have a flat 20% income tax. Gina Reinhart, Clive Palmer, they'd all pay 20%. And you know what? I can guarantee you they're paying less than that now because the incentive for them to avoid tax is just like the great Kerry Packer once said, you know, they're not doing such great things with it that we want to give them more, right? And you've got this complexity, you've got the really punitive taxation bracket system where the more you earn, the more you get taxed. So there's an incentive not to declare earnings. It's worth more. It's worth more to these people to avoid tax than to simply pay tax. And basically simplifying the system, streamlining the system, having a lower percentage rate, but a higher collection of tax is the way to go. There's no other solution to this problem than to make the system simple and fair enough that it incentivizes rather than discourages hard work and innovation. And in this country, unfortunately, we've just got this culture of penalizing success, of tall poppy syndrome, of, you know, entitlement, and it needs to end. And the Liberal Party have lost the political will and the political spine to advocate for what their principles should have them advocating for, which is reducing the state, which is saying no when people ask for handouts, which is saying we can't afford this, or we need to downscale or limit this. We can't say that over 50% of the population are disabled and give them welfare as a result. It's just not going to end well. And, you know, they're also talking about raiding the future fund, taxing unrealized gains, which is basically taxing things that haven't happened yet, because they're just running out of money. And so they're just making up ever more elaborate justifications of how to claw and redistribute your money to others.
Sick.
Yeah.
Absolutely sick.
Well, most people who watch this podcast, they want to know, you know, they're worried about the public land access and things like that. That's mostly what we're supposed to be about, but we like to go off on these other conversations. It is forests and freedom.
And freedoms.
But
and that's a really good point, because, you know, you might have a particular focus or issue that's the most important thing to you. You might be a gun owner or a shooter. You might be a fisher. You might be someone who's a bush user. You know, but the reality is that a party that has a single issue platform that says it's only about one thing is going to be asked, if they're elected to parliament, to vote on a lot of different things. And what we know is that often single issue parties have a good position on the one thing that they've got a single issue on, and on other issues, they often vote in ways that would really horrify the people who support them on the basis of that single issue. So the great thing about the Libertarian Party is you can trust us to act for your best interests and to protect your rights on everything, not just on the particular issue that you're most passionate about. You know, if you're a gun user, but you want to still have the right to smoke recreational weed, or you're a bush user, but you still want to have the right to have free speech. All of these things are things that the Libertarian Party will always defend. We will never vote against a decrease in civil liberties, and we'll never vote for an increase in taxes.
yeah. And as a gun user, I will encourage people, don't smoke the weed, then go out shooting. Not a good idea.
Well, individual responsibility and accountability. So with freedom comes obligation and consequence. Yeah. So absolutely. And I think that's been my journey in politics. Like when I was a younger man, I was much more interested in what I was allowed to do. Now, as someone who's 38 and thinking about things a bit more in terms of what kind of community and society I want to live in, I think about libertarianism in terms of what obligations can I freely assume. You know, like what should I do that I don't have to do, but I'm going to do because it's the right thing. And I think that as soon as we start thinking about libertarianism like that and explaining it like that, it's like, wouldn't it be much better if society still looked kind of like it does today, but we were doing things because we knew they were the right thing to do, instead of because the government's waiting around the corner with a gun if we don't do it. And I think that a lot of people who are the most sort of ardent, you know, enemies of our ideas and sort of attack libertarianism are the socialists and the people in government who say, oh, but, you know, if it was a lawless society and there was no restrictions or government was a lot smaller, who would stop rape and stealing and, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, what are you going to do if the government isn't there? Like I don't know many people who would behave like that if they didn't have to be good. What is your subconscious or your desires really like that you think if the government wasn't there threatening you with harm if you did the wrong thing, that you would do the wrong thing? Like I think that there's something in that where a lot of people, and we saw this through COVID, a lot of people, when allowed to do the wrong thing or encouraged to do the wrong thing, will gleefully do the wrong thing. And I think that tends to be seen more on the left of politics.
I think also in a pure libertarian society, I mean, people have the right to self-defense and the tools to use that, which I don't know if you want to get into too much now on a podcast, but
yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to need the Victorian police at the moment.
Yeah, I know David Limbrick's been campaigning a lot for people to have at least the right to pepper spray. Like, you got people breaking into your house. You don't want to wait for the police. You want to deal with the problem. The police can clean up afterwards.
Yeah, you want to prevent crime and detect crime, not simply police crime. These days, Victoria Police are only good for the insurance report. And even then, they've got a number, call us, but not the sirens. So you're actually talking to an unsworn civilian contractor instead of the police anyway. So what's the point?
Yeah.
So I think that we're not far away from communities starting to take a bit more responsibility for their own safety. And I think that's a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. So yes, some of your policies on the outdoor stuff. I know David Limbrick in Victorian Senate or Upper House has been fighting pretty hard for us. Now, is he just going off his own bat, doing his own thing, or do the Libertarians have a solid policies on these issues?
Public land access.
The thing with Libertarians is we will never have a policy position that conflicts with our principles. And David is a great person. And we've selected him to run initially before he got elected as a candidate because he's a great person. All of our candidates running at this election, and, we sort of say, oh, well, they're not going to get in or whatever, but you never know. The Liberal Party showed us last year with New South Wales council elections that sometimes the Liberal Party are just going to forget to fill out paperwork. And maybe one day a Libertarian candidate is just running unopposed and we get someone elected. So we always err on the side of making sure that anyone we put up, they're not just a paper candidate. They're not someone who's not a real person in the community. They're someone that we would stand by if they got elected, because you never know. One day they might get elected. And so I would trust even rank and file members and volunteers of our party, if Channel 9 News rocked up and put a camera in their face and said, what are the principles of the Libertarian Party, or what's the Libertarian Party's principled position on this? I would trust every single member of our party to give an answer that I would be proud of to that question, because our policy positions flow from our principles. We protect the rights of bush users, not because we like bush users particularly, or not because we even use the bush ourselves. David Limbrick, I know that he goes fishing with his sons and he's got some experience in the outdoors and, rock climbing and all that sort of stuff. But, his day-to-day may not really be having bush use as a big part of his life. But we don't need to be part of your group or part of your interest to protect your rights and to advocate and defend them. We know, without needing to do a focus group or without needing to go and consult and ask, what's the right position and all this sort of stuff, we have a principled response that's almost immediate. And that is that property rights should be protected, that individuals should be free to do the things that they want to do, so long as they're not harming others, and that the best people to make decisions are those closest to the issue or to the thing itself. And that's what informs our principles on land use and on the way public land should be used. So public land doesn't belong to the government. It doesn't belong to land councils. It belongs to all taxpayers, past, present, and future, right? It's a bit of fraught language, but the reality is we all own it. That's literally what it means. If there is a government and there is public land, then that land doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to all of us. So we believe that it should be used and regulated appropriately. At the last election in 2022, the state election, I helped Julia McGrath, who was our Western region candidate. And we did this thing where we took a photo of her 3 meters off the path in one of the state parks near Dalesford. And that's a fine of $3,000. We didn't say where it was at the time. But, it was just insane. It's you go off the path and you get fined. Someone's going to pop out from behind the bushes and say, what are you doing? You're off the path. It's insane.
How do they get you on the cameras?
Yeah, well, exactly right. And, the old saying is that you should know more about your government than they know about you. And unfortunately, we're well beyond that. And the government really seems very curious about a lot of things that really aren't any of their business.
And that's coming down from the globalists, the UN agendas and everything, digital ID, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, and look,
that was
I
once
want
a
to say,
conspiracy theory.
yeah, yeah,
It's
and
actually
look,
real.
I want to say, so I'm a law graduate. I've completed my postgraduate law studies. I graduated top of Deacon's class for 2023. So I am not someone who is ignorant of the law or international law. Like, I've read the zero draft of the pandemic preparedness treaty that the World Health Organization is, on the verge of looking at again in a month or two. So after the election, that'll be something that comes up very quickly. And I saw in the original draft of that a clause that talked about misinformation and disinformation, and word for word almost echoed exactly the kind of misinformation, disinformation legislation that our parliament was trying to pass domestically. And, you see these things permeate through and filter down, and it may not necessarily have to be a coordinated global attempt to do these things, but these people all move in the same circles. They all inform each other's ideas. They all share a view of the way the world should be and the way governments should interact with their citizens. And you may have seen, and I hope some of your viewers might look up after this when I mention it, there's a fantastic clip of Klaus Schwab from the WEF talking about libertarianism and saying how, we are the anti-system, we're basically saying that there shouldn't be any government intervention in private life or private spheres. And he thinks that's like the worst thing in the world, and that he's making this big criticism. We're like, yeah, spot on. Like, you understand.
You shall earn nothing and be happy.
Yeah, that's right. But like, their whole reason to exist is the fusion of corporations and the government. And we say that's this unholy alliance that is the worst of all worlds. Corporatism and the fusion of corporations and state is pretty much the worst of all worlds, and we vigorously oppose those things.
Well, it's a word that gets overused, but that fusion is that's the actual definition of fascism.
Yeah, well, as the Italian ruler Mussolini said, he said, everything inside the state, nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. And that's, if you apply that rule to the way we're seeing governments at a state and federal level operating, private enterprise, private initiative is viewed with suspicion, mistrust. Why don't you want the government to help? Why don't you want to tell the government what you're doing with your money? We saw in the last week with Westpac, I'm sure you all saw that, this gentleman trying to use $80,000 of his own money to buy Bitcoin, and his bank saying no.
He was being interrogated.
So apparently later the CEO of Westpac apologized to that guy. I'm sure listening to that guy talk to
only because it went public.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm sure he no longer has any money left in Westpac, and I don't think anyone should. I personally, I've been speaking to people in the last week who have said, we went up to Mildura over the weekend. I went with Jeff Barry, who's our candidate for Mallee, and we spoke with a farmer in Mildura, and he said that he got some grief from a particular bank in Mildura about what he was going to do with his money. And they said, oh, what are you going to use this? I think it was like 20 grand or something he wanted to withdraw. And he looked them dead in the eye and he said, I'm going to go to Melbourne and I'm going to blow it on blackjack and hookers. And that's just what he said to them. And the bank teller, I'm sorry, I know this might be a PG podcast, but the bank teller was like, apparently the way this guy told the story, the bank teller was like, really? Is that true? And he goes, it's none of your effing business whether it's true.
Exactly.
He goes, and I'm going to come back next week and I'm going to do the same thing. Like, but the principle of it is, it is irrelevant what they're going to do with that money. It's nothing to do with the bank. It's not the bank's money. It's your money. It's your property. But increasingly, it's like you're paying the bank for the privilege of accessing your own money. And that's even before we go into the kind of federal bail-in laws that basically promise the bank their money before you get your money, that were passed in 2009 as a response to the global financial crisis. And yeah, look, again, Lord of the Rings quote, the hour is later than you know. You know what I mean? Like, it's
we're in big trouble.
Yeah, things are even worse than people realize. And I think that's part of the problem. And if I'm elected to the Senate, the biggest thing that I want to do is I want to sound the alarm and get people aware of how bad things are and how late in the game it is. And I think that we've got many people in the crossbench who are, people of good character who have great values and are trying to do the right thing, but they don't understand that the aim of the game is not what's happening in Parliament. it is almost irrelevant. 9 times out of 10, your vote as a senator, although you should always vote in accordance with your principles and put that vote on the record, it's a distraction. It's bread and circuses. If I was elected to the Senate, I would spend the vast majority of my energy and efforts, while still absolutely putting enough effort into the parliamentary stuff that I'd be earning the salary that senators earn. I can guarantee work ethic is something that all voters can count on with me. But the main game is the platform. The main game is educating people about what actually is happening in Canberra, what it looks like from the outside perspective. Because if people knew what it looked like and they could actually see the whole thing and have it explained to them, they would be far angrier and far more concerned than they are. And I think it's by design that people are being kept ignorant of those things. And
100%.
I've said to a few people, my aim, if I'm elected, will be to become the most annoying politician in Canberra. I want the major parties to be like worried that I'm going to pop out from behind pot plants and around corners, and like I want them living in fear that I'm going to accost them and start haranguing them about free speech and tax reform. That's my mission. I'm not there to make friends. I don't want to be their colleagues. I'm not interested in anything other than aggressively prosecuting these causes.
Very good.
I like it.
They don't need more friends in Canberra.
No. Well, they don't have any friends. They've got.
They're not even friends in Canberra. They
No.
they all stab each other in the back and the front and the side and the butt and everything. They're crazy.
Yeah, that's right. Look, and I mean, this might sound a little bit strange to say, but I think my experiences in prison probably prepare me pretty well for Canberra and for Parliament.
100%.
Because prison itself was like Year 9 high school all over again, where, it's basically just a lot of, mean girl type social dynamics and, everyone talking smack about each other and no one ever really doing anything about it. And, I think that if I'm elected, my goal will be to cut through that place like a hot knife through butter.
I'd say the only difference between Parliament and prison would be there's no shanks.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, depending on how good parliamentary security is, if they're as bad as the security of the MCG, there might be. Who knows? Might have to walk carefully. Just go in strapped with a 3D printed gun. No. Not real, ASIO.
Interesting you brought that one up because obviously I'm about the guns, right? That's sort of my passion. And it's crazy to me. Like, I thought guns were illegal in Australia. How is it?
In the last 2 weeks, there's been about 5 in Melbourne alone. 5 instances of people getting shot, stood over, accosted with guns. Look, none of these people have had a legal gun license. None of them have had any respect for the law. None of them have had any issues obtaining firearms. You got a 23 and a 25-year-old on bail with legal firearms. Like, Victoria has more weapons and more availability of black market guns than at any point in its history. And I didn't exercise with vaping about a month ago, where we just went out in the CBD and saw how long it would take and how much it would cost to find illegal vapes. I might have to wait till I get parliamentary privilege to do this, but I'm confident that if you gave me $5,000 and 24 hours, I would come back well armed from Melbourne CBD. I can pretty much guarantee that.
Yeah, wouldn't be the right stunt. I think you'd be in a lot of trouble.
Well, I mean, I've been in trouble before. I might be able to find a way to do it in a way that, like, if I did this, if this happened.
But yeah, so as a law-abiding citizen, someone breaks into my house, I can't use my firearms. I know that. So don't come after me thinking I'm not a suitable person to own firearms. But even just saying that I should be able to, I think, is sort of risky these days in Victoria. But the truth is, the Crims have got them.
Yep.
I can't protect my wife, my children, and, I'm out in the country. The police can be well over an hour away. So,
Well, it's more than that. In WA, the state government doxed lawful firearm holders.
Yeah.
So they literally put a Google Map pin marker on their address. And
that was so bad.
It was awful. It was awful. And one of the biggest causes, or one of the biggest sources of black market weapons, is theft of legitimate firearms from farms. That happens all the time. You'll get someone gets released from prison, or there's someone who's been working in a shearing shed or whatever, and they kind of get a sense of where the guns are stored, and then next minute you've got a burglary break-in, and the weapons are gone. So and
the government just went and put little dot points everywhere of everyone's property.
Yeah.
Well, I went beyond that. So the government did that, and then they told the firearm owners, now they've got to have cameras, alarm systems, and a thicker safe than what's standard. So, it's a little bit like with one hand they give. With one action, they're exposing and making it easier for the crims and the other action, they're trying now to sort of undo the damage they did themselves, which just
and put the blame on you, because if you didn't have the proper safe, if you didn't have the right security system, it's your fault that somebody came and stole your guns.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So look, and at the end of the day, I said this to Matt Long on my second discernible interview with him. I said, if you ever get the feeling like the government hates you, you're probably getting the correct feeling.
100%.
I've run through most of my noted questions. Did you have any, Carly?
No.
No.
I'm
Well, I have to say, I've very much enjoyed watching Carly's political journey and increasing radicalization. And
don't say that word.
Radicalization is not a dirty word. I am a radical. I am a fundamentalist when it comes to libertarian policy, and I'm quite proud of that. I don't think ideology should be a dirty word. Our enemies, the socialists of both kinds, national and Victorian, are very happy to sort of fight an ideological battle and to advance their principles and ideas as abhorrent as they are. So we need to be proud and not hide away from having principled positions, because I think that's the biggest takeaway for me this federal election. And I think looking at the polls, the majority of Australians feel the same way. They've seen about 8 days of Peter Dutton and they're like, "Nah, I'm out." They're like, I'm not going to give him a chance. I'm not going to give him another 3 weeks. Like, his election's done. His campaign's over. All right. Like, the reality is people aren't paying attention anymore. They don't care what he's going to say now. It's being described as losing momentum, but in reality, people just aren't going to give him the
water.
He's gone, because people were looking to him for an alternative vision and leadership. He hasn't provided.
And they didn't get it.
And now, no matter what he says, people just aren't going to care. So, I think that the solution to that is not more vapid, weak, moderate sort of focus group driven policy. And it's not that Australians don't want what America has and hate Trump and all this sort of stuff. It's the fact that Peter Dutton isn't those things. The things the left are calling him and saying, "Oh, he's Trump, he's this, he's that." We're like, we wish.
Exactly.
Like, if only. I think the solution is more principles and more bold vision and more leadership, because 20% of people will agree with you, 20% will disagree, and the other 60% are going to go, "Okay, you know what? Maybe not what I would do, but let's see where this goes, and at least I can respect that they've got a position." And that was John Howard's magic for the first couple of terms he was in. He lost his way a bit towards the end because he got control of both houses of Parliament, and, like the Lord of the Rings analogy, it corrupted that last term of Liberal government and set in train the events and the norms that we see now of growing government, growing spending, fiscal irresponsibility. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. My dad always used to say that, and he was a police officer for 19 years. And, that's certainly been backed up by my life experiences.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight too that how much we appreciate what you guys have been doing, Libertarians and you, in our fight against this park. That, like, you've been there since the beginning and held rallies even before I knew about the whole political scene. And I was, we're not getting political. This isn't about politics. We won't be getting into politics. How wrong was I? So,
yeah, that's the thing. And the thing is, even if you're not interested in politics, eventually politics becomes interested in you.
Yeah, 100%.
We've been conditioned not to talk about politics, not to care, to be apathetic, because that serves the status quo. I think we really need to break people out of that complacency and give people the understanding that they can be an incredibly powerful force and they can affect change.
Yeah, and that's my biggest goal at the moment now, especially like coming up to this election, is the people that are saying, there's no point voting, there's no point doing this, there's no point doing that, we're stuffed either way. No, we're not. We can make change happen, but we need to stand up and we need to actually be productive towards those minor parties and get involved. Start talking, tell people, tell your neighbours, tell your family, tell your friends. Talk about politics, because if we don't And if we keep this under wraps, they're going to keep doing what they're doing, and we're going to lose this country.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. So, look, thank you in turn for advocating for that really important issue. And I think that it's a great example of community action actually having a great result because, the Labor Party in Victoria, the state government has really been running scared and they've really been put on the back foot in some important ways.
They don't like me.
Good. You should be proud of the enemies you have. That's something I've found. Like if somebody doesn't have good enemies, then they haven't made important.
They haven't stood up for something in their lives.
The quality of your enemies says a lot about you, Carly, and I think that the signs are bright.
The whole state government, that's pretty
hopefully
good.
Many more enemies. Hopefully, many more enemies to come.
Yeah.
I know it's not really a federal issue, but we did talk about it a little bit with Warren in another episode, which is the timber industry and shutting that down in Victoria. Do you? It's questions without notice, but
no, that's okay. I mean, we're importing wood from overseas. It's insane. Like, we and it's not even about, it's not even about the practical conservation dimensions of it because, you can replant non-old growth. You can have a sustainable timber industry based on regenerative practices. Like if it was about the environment and if it was about actual environmental outcomes, then it wouldn't be banned on principle. And I think you can see the same thing that has happened to the timber industry coming for the coal industry.
100%.
They're saying, oh, timber lost its social license. Well, another way of putting that, the Greens, is that you kill timber's social license through a propaganda campaign. We can see Matt Keane doing it again now with coal, where he says, oh, coal's lost its social license. Nobody wants to invest in coal. Well, that's because the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is a publicly owned non-financial corporation, aka a government company, is basically making it impossible to invest in anything other than renewable energy. So they're stacking the deck, they're picking winners and losers, and they're trying to curate an outcome so that they can say, oh, well, look, this is exactly what we said would happen. And then they're calling it free markets.
Then not only that, though, they're actually stacking Parliament with these TEALs that are funded by Simon Holmes Court with Climate 200. So, that's just mind-blowing to me that these people are they're making money for this millionaire.
You look at Malcolm Turnbull and Lucy Turnbull and like the renewables lobby and the kind of grift and the incentives that are there for them to say what they're saying, and then pretending as though they're independent and they trust the science and whatever. It's like, no, you trust your pocket and your wallet.
Exactly.
Like, isn't it great that the science very conveniently makes you very rich? How good is that?
And if it doesn't make them very rich, they turn it around and pay people to make it, so they make it very rich. Like, yeah, and then you're not allowed to debate it. You're not allowed to question anything about the science. You have to trust the science. I actually was, threatened by a university only a couple of days ago about questioning one of their professors, who's in one of the top 5 of Australian professors. So he must know what he's talking about. How dare you question anything that he says? But isn't that what science is about? Asking questions?
Yeah, look, the scientific method relies on testing and constant retesting of hypotheses. The moment you say that something is settled and it can never be questioned, that becomes an article of faith rather than a tested hypothesis. You always have to be constantly re-examining previously held assumptions in the light of new information. That's the very essence of Western thought, of the Enlightenment, of scientific method. And the moment somebody tells you that something is black and white and you can't have a reasonable objection, or you can't even be curious about something that is supposedly settled, then you are entering the territory of religious zeal and cult rather than science.
It is. It's a cult. It is. That's what this is. This whole environmental movement. I'm saying it. It's a cult.
It looks a lot like the old paganism, I've got to be honest.
It's creepy.
What did Nietzsche say? God is dead. We've killed him. And it's there's I think a lot of concerns around this kind of desperate need. Look, at the end of the day, right? I'm somebody who cares a lot about our environment. We've only got one.
We all do.
And do you know what? I don't need to be scared at gunpoint through government coercion and this kind of great moral panic into doing the right thing. Like, I'm
Mm.
somebody who likes to minimize the impact I have on the environment, who makes decisions on that basis. I just don't think that you should be basically crippling our economy and forcing people into energy poverty, and literal cost of living poverty on the
Yeah.
altar of this, grand moral panic. So, yeah.
The real situation that these politicians aren't actually even addressing also, and it's something that I'm going to start looking into, is how high has our suicide rate gone at the
Well, I
moment?
think that just the other day you saw a young man whose mortgage repayments jumped up massively when he went onto variable rates take his own life. I think suicide is the leading cause of young men under 45 in particular, and it's horrific. And I've struggled and occasionally still do struggle with mental health challenges. And I think that there's a lot of men who feel very isolated, who feel like they have to try to do everything on their own. It's not only young men, but I think they're particularly vulnerable to that. And I think that, we're also forcing young people into a state of constant anxiety about the future, about their world. We have more anxiety and mental health problems now than we did when people thought a nuclear war was literally imminent. That tells you something. It's this constant state of stress and heightened anxiety and fear. And I think that it's intentional, because if you're afraid, you'll consume,
Yeah, and you won't fight back.
be that information or products, and you'll say, well, it's really important we don't rock the boat. We have to comply in order to, prevent this horrible outcome. But yeah, I don't think we do.
No, we don't.
Dark subject, but an important one.
Mm.
Yeah, well, it is, and I think something that people don't know a lot about with the national park fight that I took on, right? So I don't talk about this a lot because it's people's experiences, and they come to me privately about it. But the amount of messages from men, grown ass men, been around 60, 50, 40 years, whatever, that actually message me or contact me and say, Carly, if this is taken away from me, if this park happens, I won't survive. I won't make it through. And that's been I think one of the biggest reasons that when this does get hard, when it has gotten really hard, and these personal attacks and lawfare and everything like that, when they all start popping up, and that's really what pushes me is, that there's so many people that are counting on us to stop this from happening, because there are literal lives at stake, and this government have blood on their hands.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that to end on a positive note, to acknowledge that very real stakes and the consequences of not fighting this fight across all arenas. But I think that the thing I would want to finish on and leave your viewers and listeners with is the fact that change and positive change is so achievable. It's within our grasp. The only thing that keeps us locked in this dynamic is that we continue to do the same things we've always done. We don't change banks, we don't change supermarkets, we don't make change, and we complain when things stay the same. Well, this election is your opportunity to use your vote and to use the power you have to send a message to the major parties. If I'm elected to the Senate and people vote one Libertarian and allow me to get that percentage I need to be elected, that will send shockwaves through the political establishment, and the Liberal Party will realise that there is a significant portion of Victorians who don't agree with what's being done in their name, who do want somebody who will stand up for civil liberties and fight for a better future for all of us. And that is more powerful than I think people realise. And the only reason that our political parties and the people and the whole industries that sort of survive off them behave the way they do is because they think they can. They think they can get away with it, because that's the message we've
let them.
Because we've been telling them for the last 20 years that it's okay to treat us like this. It's like when you see somebody in a really toxic relationship and you can see clear as day from outside that relationship that nothing's going to change, that the person is, not good for you, etc. And you say, no, it's okay. They did this thing wrong, but they're not going to do it
Trauma
again.
bond. We've got trauma bonds with the government.
Codependency. Yep, codependency and trauma. And basically, we can just walk away. We can vote with our feet, and we can send a really important signal to disrupt the status quo.
And we have to do it this year.
I agree.
How are we for time there, Carly?
Yeah, we're right on an hour, I think.
Right on an hour.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Depending on how things go on the 3rd of May, if I'm elected, I look forward to joining you for a future episode as a senator.
That would be amazing.
Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff that I've got to say. Jordan, may the force be with you. Thank you for joining.
All right,
Thanks, guys.
see you guys.